Over the years, I've kind of learned which gear is going to work for depending on how it sounds and how it needs to sound, that kind of thing. So I just kind of pick a handful of pieces that I think are going to be nice for the project and dial them in and then capture it back to digital. But I think one thing that's different about my workflow perhaps is when I get the first song dialed in, I don't record it back in. I move on to the next song, and I try to use the analog gear as more of a broader stroke kind of thing and try to find something that's going to work perhaps for the entire EP or record. To do very little to no changes on the analog gear. And what really helps with that is, are you familiar with the Better Maker stuff?
Yeah, sure.
So,
I checked it. I checked out one of their pieces in my studio back in the day.
Yeah, the cool thing with Better Maker is it's digitally controlled analog gear. So I have the EQ and the compressor and the limiter, which I don't really hardly ever use, but the EQ is great. So I can have per song settings on the analog piece of gear. So as I flip from song 1 to song 2 to song 9 to song 3, I can hop around really quickly to see how they're all working together, in terms of tone and volume, and adjust, and then just keep fine-tuning until everything feels great. And then I can capture everything in one pass usually without having to touch any knobs because the EQ is automated. The level going into analog chain is automated. Obviously, the plugins before going analog are automated, so it becomes a really easy process. I have like a handful of converters I use to feed the analog gear and record it back in, and I can automate different converters for each song. So like song 1 might sound good with the Crane song head capturing, but song 2, like I'm sure it would sound fine with the head, but sometimes like a different converter I have is a little more favorable for that piece of music, especially if it's the kind of converter where you can like add some harmonics. The new Neve thing has a harmonic, I forget what they call it, saturation. And it's not like, it's very subtle saturation.
Everything with mastering is like pretty much subtle stuff.
Yeah,
right?
They basically have a transformer on it, so you can like add some color. So I can have one set up to be like the color piece where it's like, if there's 1 or 2 songs that need a little more grit or saturation, I can automate it so that whenever that song is playing or being recorded back in, that's the converter that's being recorded on. So I can automate quite a lot of things for being an analog studio, using analog gear. So what I like about that, my whole point was, because in the old days I used to like record every song back in one at a time, which is probably how a lot of people still do it. But I find that to be, aside from slower, it's like, okay, maybe after you got 7 of the 10 songs done, you listen to song 1 and now you're like, oh, I wish it was a little bit brighter. And then you got to do a lot of changes, get it back, and then re-record it in real time. I feel like it's just a really slow way to work these days when you don't have to. So for me, like I said, I just hop around until I'm totally happy with the record. Due to all the automation stuff that I have, I can usually commit an EP or an album in one pass. So, I mean, if it's a 40-minute record, it takes 40 minutes, but I just go, take the dog for a walk or get lunch or answer some emails. And then, when it's captured back to digital, then I go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Are you familiar with Isotope RX?
Yeah, sure.
So
I know that you do a lot of like QA and mastering, like you mentioned that on your site.
Yeah. So I listen through.
If you want to go into that, that's cool.
Yeah. So after it's captured back to digital, I listen through usually on headphones. Like the Odyssey headphones are just incredible for. Aside from sounding good, they're so revealing of clicks and pops and thumps and plosives and all this stuff.
These are the LCD-Xs, right?
Yeah. Amazing. It's like a microscope for your ears. The speakers are too, but these, I think, take it to the next level. So, I go through it and remove all the clicks and pops, and sometimes it's background hiss from a guitar amp or a noisy microphone preamp. But the reason I do it after I capture it back is because occasionally whether it's the client points it out or myself, if you want to rework an RX edit, I don't have to recapture it from analog again. I capture everything like natural, like no cleanup work at all. It's just totally natural because then, it's just easier to rework. If you decide that you over denoised a part or if you were too aggressive on the declicking or, there's been times where I remove, like the drummer does a drum fill and they hit their sticks together. Most of the time people don't want that, but I removed a drum fill where the drummer clicked his sticks together and I removed it and they wanted that kept in because they thought it was funny or maybe they were shaming the drummer. I don't know. But my point was I could easily get that back without having to redo a lot of work because it's just a click away Whereas if I would have done that first, it would have been a lot of work to get that back. So anyways, listen through the whole record, clean it up. Then I kind of export each song from Reaper as a new cleaned up file. Because once I start spot editing, I guess I should step back, because one cool thing about Reaper and Wavelab has this too now, where I use RX standalone to do the edits, but I don't load the songs into RX. With Reaper, you can highlight like a problem, like a 3-second area where there's a mouth click or two, whatever, a small chunk. You can highlight it, press a shortcut. A copy of that section opens in RX. You make the fix, you save and close the file in RX. When you toggle back to Reaper, the fixed section is now in place.
Jeez,
so it's like,
that's insane.
Yeah. What it is, it's really easy to do like lightning turbo edits, just like boom, boom, edit. And the cool thing is you have a roadmap of where all your edits are, because what could happen and what does happen is clients will be like, oh, we love the mastering you did, but we had to we forgot to put the backing vocals in. So like, here's a new mix. Can you just run it through your same thing? And I think a lot of clients think that's like a 2-minute job, but it's not. But the way I do those RX edits, I have a nice roadmap. I can open the session and be like, oh, I did only 3 RX edits. This will be easy. And they're right there and right there and right there. Or I can open and say, oh man, I did like 30 edits on this one song. It's going to take forever to redo it. But I still have that roadmap of where I made all the edits. And there's been times where I can reuse those edits. Like at the end of a song, I've mastered plenty of songs where there's like metronome bleed at the tail end, when the last note's ringing out and then you can hear that metronome. Mm-hmm. I can remove that fairly easily, and it's not hard, but due to my workflow, if someone sends me a new mix and there's no change at the tail, the last note, I can
just keep that.
I can toggle back to my original fix and not have to redo that work. So it's a cool workflow to use either Wavelab or Reaper and have RX be its external editor. So then you're just like sending bits and pieces to the standalone app. You get like all the benefits of the standalone app with the convenience of Audio Suite, like in Pro Tools. Because when I first moved to Reaper, I was worried that it didn't have Audio Suite. I'm like, I use Audio Suite all the time for fixing clicks and pops with declick or whatever. What am I going to do? But this is actually faster. It seems slower, but highlight it, press a shortcut. It automatically opens RX for you or focuses it. It's so fast to do rapid fire edits. So anyways, my point is, usually songs are like broken up now into a bunch of little pieces, or at least some. It's not a continuous file anymore. So I render it out to new files and I load those into Wavelab, and that's when I put the songs in the for sure correct order, and that's when I worry about the spacing between songs or if there's any crossfades. Put in the track markers, put in the metadata, and then I can render those. And it's also where I do my final limiting. So in Reaper, I usually have a limiter running live just on playback or in the monitoring section. It's not being rendered or captured or recorded in any way. I'm just listening through the limiter, just to get a feel for what's it going to sound like when I add like 2 or 3 dB of limiting with my limiter, because that's about what I do on real projects. Of course, I do it much more refined when I'm finishing it up, but that's it. Just give me a rough idea of how does this sound when we hit it with a limiter. But when I render it out of Reaper, the limiter is not applied. So I'm getting just the raw captures from my analog chain. Then Wavelab is also where I do the final limiting and determine how loud it's going to be and the song, make sure the song-to-song levels are okay. Ideally, I don't need to use any EQ in Wavelab, but sometimes when I'm doing the final sequencing, I'm like, oh, it'd be nice if song 3 had maybe a little more low end. So I capture at a reasonable enough level where I can put a clip effect right on song 3 and do subtle EQ tweaks. Now, if I'm way off, I'll go back and redo it from the start. But if it's like small changes, I can do it right there in Wavelab before I render. And this whole workflow makes it easy to like do revisions, because if the client's like, we love it, but can you make it a little louder? I don't have to go back to the analog chain or I just go open up Wavelab, save it as version 2.
Bada bing, bada boom.
A little more limiting, and it's just really flexible. I found that works well for me. I can't really, I don't want to paint myself in a corner with like limited captures that are already just brick walled, because then revisions get hard, vinyl pre-masters get perhaps impossible. You just paint yourself into too much of a corner that way. So
I love it, because people, that's why everyone's mixing in the box these days, is because of the, revisions, and artists expect revisions now, like it's nothing. So you're kind of protecting yourself from all these revisions, which will, definitely happen.
Yeah, it definitely is and I don't want to make it sound like it's a compromise to the project either. I mean, that's how I would prefer to work anyways. I mean, in a lot of ways, my analog captures would be the ideal master for me in terms of level, because it's like not limited, and it might be clipping the input of the converter a hair, but it's pretty reasonable level. But that's not really going to fly for most clients. They want it a little more smashed and limited. So, like I said, that's usually what works for vinyl. And the other reason it works is because I'm doing a lot of singles for artists, and then after we do like 4 or 5 singles, they want to release it as an EP, and that allows me to rework the previously mastered songs.
Right,
to
and
work
then you
as
take
EP.
it in Wavelab and just kind of refinish it up.
Yeah, because I can keep a lot of the work I did, but I'm not stuck with that limited crushed version that you can only do so much with that. So I feel like I can properly turn a handful of singles into an EP or an album and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love it. I just want to go back a second on the RX stuff, because I don't think that all mastering engineers are so detail oriented when it comes to quality assurance and stuff like that. That might be like one of your signature moves.
Yeah,
Would you say so?
Yeah, I'm admittedly probably more sensitive to it and OCD about it, but once you start hearing mouth clicks, I mean, technically, yeah, maybe it's the mix engineer's job to clean these up before sending it off, but the reality is those mouth clicks and things get so loud after mix, the compression that you're adding in mixing and then in mastering, they just get unnaturally loud. I mean, I've never been to a show and heard a mouth click really, but you listen to a lot of modern recordings on headphones or a good system, and it can be like mouth click city. And I don't want to make it too sterile, and I'm not trying to make it artificial, but to me, those are distractions, and I don't want any distractions in the final product. And sometimes people think I'm talking about breaths, and I'm not talking about, breaths are natural. You got to breathe to sing, and that's part of the emotion and stuff like that and the intensity. But I'm just talking about these lip smacks. There's probably a ton of them in this interview for me talking. But, those things just get so unnaturally loud. It's like louder than the snare drum sometimes. And it's like, no, if I was at a show, the snare drum would be way louder than any mouth clicks. So they're just distractions. I also I still do some de-essing with like a stereo de-esser. I have software de-esser before I go analog. I have a hardware de-esser I can use, but I've found that the best way to do de-essing is with RX, because you can just highlight the S sound. You can use like the lasso tool or you can just highlight the S, and then they have a de-esser module that you can have a shortcut for and just press the button. And you got to play with the threshold still, but you can like really hone in on loud S's and like tame them without harming, hi-hats and, acoustic guitars. Crazy. I mean, it takes longer because you're kind of like doing it one by one, but not all S's are created equal. When I'm doing this, like
that's definitely true.
It's like,
it's usually the first S of the song that's like the least equal.
Yeah,
I found in my mixing.
Yeah, so when I'm doing this,
like every S works except for the first one.
Yeah, and I just one day I had a really problematic. It was actually a remaster of an album, and it was actually one of the first digital recordings in the 1980s. And I think they were just used to recording on tape, but they recorded on digital, and the S's were just like tearing my head off. And I'm like, man, like I can't even really tame these with any de-esser that I have. So I just kind of naturally reach for RX. I'm like, what if I just circle the S in RX and like, it takes some fine tuning, and you go one. The cool thing though is when it's done, it's done. Like you don't have to worry about your settings anymore. It's just taken care of. It takes a little longer, but man, is it effective and transparent.
Yeah.
And I just, maybe I'm pricing myself out of mastering now too, like I did with mixing and recording. It takes long. It takes longer to do, but man, it's like the most effective way to de-ess in my opinion. And like whether it's S's or clicks or pops, it'd be great if the mix engineer did that, but honestly, there's more important things to worry about. And sometimes those problems, they fly under the radar with an unmastered mix.
Yeah,
again,
totally.
Once you start cleaning things up, making it more detailed and clear, and then, of course, raising the average loudness, those things just start to pop out like crazy, and it's kind of like...
Yeah, I've totally noticed like mix errors in masters that I didn't even hear until it was mastered.
Yeah, so I just, it's so easy to fix in RX.